So what I'd like to talk about, and this was a term in listening to me that Steve coined, inflection points that I've had with God, or maybe even better yet, inflection points in my life that God has had with me. And I think, as you will find out, it's probably been more God knocking on my door than me knocking on God's door over the years. So what I'd like to do is roll the clock back to 1960. This was really my first introduction to faith. Methodist church camp. At that time, I lived in a real small town west of Evansville, Indiana, named Carmi, Illinois, 5,200 people. Our family attended the Methodist church, and I went to church camp, as many of you probably did over the years. That was a big thing in those days, and made a decision to commit my life to Christ when I was about 11 or 12 years old. Now, there are a lot of things that you don't know when you're 11 or 12 years old, so clearly I've thought about that commitment a lot over the years and made recommitments, but in any event, that was kind of my first introduction. At the same time, in the Sunday school class that I was going to at the church, they gave each of us a thing called a tithe card. Now, I was 11 years old at this time. I wasn't exactly sure what a tithe card was, other than I was going to commit to give 10% of my income, every Sunday in Sunday school. And at that time, I was getting an allowance of 50 cents a week. And so 10% was going to be a nickel. And in Carmi, Illinois, for a nickel, you could buy a bag of popcorn at the movie theater, or a Coke, or a Dairy Queen. And so it was kind of easy for me to identify what that 10% would cost. The next summer, I finally began to work, and I started mowing yards. And during the summer, I would mow your yard for 50 cents if it was a small yard, or $1 if it was a big one. So inflation has clearly taken place over the years. But that particular summer, I made $151 before expenses. My dad made me pay for new air filters for the lawnmower, and oil for the lawnmower, and gasoline. And after expenses, I made $139 exactly. As I went through the summer, it was hard work, and I thought I was putting the money in my passbook savings account at First National Bank of Carmi, Illinois. And got to the end of the summer. Sunday school started up again after Labor Day, and I realized that I had not tithed on the money that I had been making from mowing lawns. At the same time, there was a sale at the local sporting goods store in Carmi, and there was a baseball glove there that I had wanted to buy, which I had seen there the whole summer. It's a Mickey Mantle glove. A few of you remember who Mickey Mantle was. And it was on sale for exactly $13.90. So exactly 10% of my net income for the summer, and the same amount that I owed to God as a tithe. And I really struggled about what to do. As you can tell, I did end up buying the baseball glove, and I made the tithe, and I've been blessed in my life to have made a lot of money. But I will tell you that $13.90 tithe was the hardest check I've ever written in my life, but it was something that was important to get started on. And I think it's just been, it was really difficult for me, given that was the first money that I ever made. But in any event, we were in the middle of working on this. I had joined a church in Evanston, Illinois, called First Presbyterian Church of Chicago, or First Presbyterian Church of Evanston. And the senior pastor there was a guy named David Hanley. And David and I became good friends. And one day as I was leaving the church, we were shaking hands, and he said, "John, there's something that I'd like to talk to you about. Could we have breakfast this week and chat about this?" And I said, "Sure, Dave, I'll call you and we'll pick a date." And for those of you who live in Chicago, and particularly the northern suburbs, you'll know that Walker Brothers is a great pancake house, and better than pancakes, they have great bacon, which is really why I like to go there. But in any event, Dave and I met at breakfast, and usually when Dave wanted to meet with me, it was about money. And there was a special project that he needed to have done, and he couldn't find the funding to do it. And it was, "Can you help me out a little bit, John, to get this done at the church?" And he mentioned that God had been leading him in a direction of starting a prison ministry at the church, which would be picking up young children in the city and taking them to visit their mothers in a state prison about 100 miles west of Chicago. And he had become convinced that the church should do this, and more so, God had convinced him that I should lead the effort to start this prison ministry at the church. And I thought, oh boy, I said, this is going to be a lot different than just writing a check. And so, checks I could write, and they were easy to do, but to actually spend time doing something was going to be a little different. So thought about it as he was speaking, and I said, "Dave, I think you've got a communication problem." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, You're clearly not hearing God correctly. God does not want me to lead this prison ministry effort and at the church." And he said, "No, John, I think I'm hearing this thing the way it was told to me." And I said, "Listen, Dave, I'm just way too busy. We're trying to do this little buyout thing right now. I'm working, 70, 80 hours a week. I'm in New York, every single week trying to raise the money, or in Tokyo. And, I've just got more important things to do. I'm too busy to do this." About a month later, the buyout effort failed. We were $500 million short of the $4.5 billion we needed to do the company, to buy the company. Big article in the Chicago Tribune. A day later, Dave Hanley calls me, and he said, "John, it looks like God has freed up a little bit of your time." And I said, "Well, I don't know if he's freed it up to do what you want me to do, but I certainly have a little more time than I thought I had." The next Sunday in church, the most incredible thing I think that's ever happened to me in my life happened. It was the end of church. A woman came up to introduce herself to me. We'd never met before. In fact, I don't think I'd ever even seen her in church. She asked me if I was John Edwardson. I said I was. Her name was Janet Rogers. And she said, "I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but I was praying this week, and God told me your name in prayer and asked me to give you this note." And on the sheet of paper was simply Isaiah chapter 42, verses 6 and 7. So let me read them to you right now. I'm going to have to put my glasses on to do it. This is Isaiah talking about the fact that Jesus would be coming back. So part of this is clearly not related to the message she wanted to give me, but the second verse is, "I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness, and I will hold your hand. I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the Gentiles, to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from prison, those who sit in darkness in the prison house." So I thanked her for this, sheet of paper. Went home, called Dave up later in the afternoon and said, "You set me up." And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, this woman came up to greet me after church. Her name was Janet Rogers." And he said, "John, I had nothing to do. I haven't asked Janet Rogers to talk to you. What did she talk to you about?" And I told him about the scriptures that she had asked me to read. And he promised me that he had nothing to do with this. And he said, "So what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I guess you and I are going to take a little trip to the inner city of Chicago, pick some kids up, and go to prison, because if I'm going to do it, you're going to do it with me. And we did that. So that began about an 8-year journey with 2 different families, and picking their children up. I told Don a number of the stories last evening about the experiences of driving into the inner city and picking these kids up on a Saturday morning and then taking them to visit their mother in prison. I thought it was going to be much different than it was. I looked at it as I could pick the kids up, do briefcase work while they were visiting with their mother. They would come back out of the prison. I didn't realize that I was going to have to go into the prison with them. I couldn't take my briefcase in, obviously. I was heavily frisked before you went in. And both women that I worked with over this period were in prison for murder, and it was just a really life-changing experience to sit in a prison cafeteria with prisoners and families all around, a little bit different group than I typically associated with. But a very leveling group, I have to tell you, because it was very clear to me that God loved all of the people in that room just as much as God loved me, and it was something that was important for me to learn, but also more important to think about the children. So, but in any event, another article in the paper, I'm out of work. Dave Hanley, the pastor of First Presbyterian, calls me again. And he said, John, hey, I read this article in the paper about you. It looks like you got some free time, and I've got another idea. And I said, now, is this like another direct message from God, or is this just your idea? He said, this is pretty much my idea. You haven't been the one that I've been told to call, but he said, but, you know, it's just timely. I've been doing this a little bit, and I think you would be really skilled at doing this particular job. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, I'd like you to be a bouncer at the homeless shelter in Edwardson. And I said, so what does that entail? He said, it's pretty simple. He said, people come in for dinner, and you have dinner with them. You make sure that the guys that are there, few gals there, you know, clean up the dishes and everything gets put back. It was a different church than the one we went to just across the street. And then he said, you know, people have got to take showers, get cleaned up. There is, if people want to attend it, a Bible study and prayer before people go to bed. And then your biggest job is to make sure that the women and the men don't get together during the night. So you got to stay awake all night to kind of keep track of what's going on. And you know, and I said, Dave, I said, this is really, you know, why do you think I would be good at doing this? And he said, I just think that, you know, you could, you know, figure this out and you know how to do it. So I did agree to do it. I only did it 6 times. It was a once a month commitment, and when I started, when I went back to work again, it was just too hard, as you can imagine, to stay up all night and go into work. And they didn't need weekend duty. They had a lot of volunteers on weekends. They needed weeknight duty. So before I close, there was one other scripture I wanted to read to you. This has always been my favorite scripture, and if I can get to Matthew here and find it. And I think particularly for those of us who are type A or double A individuals and who've been in leadership positions in companies, this is a really hard one, I think, for many of us to handle, so I'll just read it to you. It's Jesus speaking, and it'll be familiar to many of you. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, for most of us in the room, we did what we did because we didn't want to wear anyone else's yoke. And I think even though it's Jesus speaking, it's really been difficult for me to be the kind of person who would let him put that yoke on me easily, and I wouldn't chafe with it around my neck or fight back or do things like that. And so what I'm really hoping to do as I go through this transition is to be a good listener, so that maybe God doesn't have to have Dave Hanley speak to me, that I can listen on my own. So I don't know what's in store next for me, but fortunately there wasn't a lot of press about my retirement in the Chicago Tribune, and fortunately David Hanley is in a church in Tennessee right now, and so I don't think he's read that I'm retired, but I'm expecting a phone call from David Hanley any day. So thank you so much.